Can't see you though, John. You're hiding behind the pillar. You're very welcome. Okay. Okie doke. Well, it's almost on Carpet Day today, isn't it?
Yes.
Not really celebrated much, did we? We weren't out there at 5 a.m. prostrating and circumambulating. Well, you might have been. I didn't see you because I wasn't. So Lama Tsongkhapa is our sort of patron saint, as you must know. 14th century. 14th century Lama, yeah. Must be here somewhere. Where is he?
Over there.
Where is he? I can't bend so well. There you go. Okay.
Lower.
You'd think we'd need Martha around here. We've got big fat Guru Mache here. We've got a big fat Guru Mache there. You'd mistake us for Martha. Okie doke. So today it said something about what was it? Regret and guilt. Don't know what you're expecting, but we'll see what happens. Okay, but first let's do a little prayer. If you want to join in, we can. It's on page 88. 2 little prayers we can start with. But don't forget, because you don't get all holy if you say the word prayers. You know, a prayer really is just a bunch of thoughts. And all you're trying to do as a Buddhist is program your mind with thoughts in the way the Buddha thinks. Honestly, that's all it is. It's like when you're doing music, you're programming your mind with musical thoughts. And here we're programming our mind with Buddhist thoughts. And the Buddha would say every thought counts, which we're going to be talking about now. So this first prayer is on the bottom of 88. The first 2 lines are just for those of us who consider ourselves Buddhist. It's expressing, reminding us, reiterating our reliance upon the Buddha and his teachings and the Sangha. And the second 2 lines are expressing an altruistic motivational reason, as we'd say in the West, for doing what we're doing, which is that is to say, sitting here listening to Buddha's ideas about happiness, suffering, blah, blah, blah. And the motivation, we talked about this during the week, and we need to discuss it here. We're going to be discussing the regret part of purification, is that the key thing is the motivation for what we do determines the character of that action, not the thing itself. So we're going to get into this. So this is expressing an altruistic motivation. You're kind of thinking, okay, I'm sitting here to listen to what Buddha has to say. Why? So I can take some tools from this to use in my life to help me, lessen my neuroses and misery and fears and grow my courage and compassion and wisdom. Why, in turn, even that, so I can help others do the same. Kind of thinking like this, if it makes sense. Sangye chodam soke chomnam la janchu parudaki kyapsuchi dagi chunyen gipe sonaki drola meche sangye drupasho Sangye chodam soke chomnam la janchu parudaki kyapsuchi dagi chunyen gipe sonaki drola meche sangye drupasho Sangye chodam soke chodam la janchu parudaki kyapsuchi dagi chunyen gipe sonaki drola meche sangye drupasho. And another little prayer, the one on the page before, it's called offering a mandala somewhere. The top, no it's not, it's called, there it is, short mandala. And all this is kind of using our creative imagination and daydreaming for a moment and imagining all the lovely things of this world of beings use, the objects of the senses. And we're going to, which is the contents of the universe basically. And that's what a mandala is in this sense here. So of course if you know Buddhist cosmology, you'll be offering, hello there, goddesses and holy cows and Lord knows what, But here if you don't know all about that, and Mount Meru and things, and the 4 continents and the sun and the moon, if you know that, and you think that, but if you don't, you just offer all the lovely things of the world as we know it, like the things in the nice shops, and even markets and all the rest, all the nice things that beings use in the sky and the moon and the food and the music. That's all it means, offering, thinking of piling up all the marvelous things of this world and then happily offering to the Buddha as if he were here himself. Because as we know, it's auspicious to offer something before we receive something. It is as if Buddha were here giving us these teachings. So imagine like that. Sajipa ki jukshing meto Chamrila bingji mantra at the bottom of the page, as we say this, we imagine the Buddha happily receiving our offering. As Lama Zopa says, that's the very meaning of the word offering, puja, chur, is seeing the recipient, in this case the Buddha, delightfully receiving, so blissfully receiving our offering. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. I'm sorry, I need to bring my nose blowing equipment. I need one. So, okay. This business of regret and guilt, this is implying the practice of purifying, as they call it in Buddhism. And to understand that, we have to understand karma, because to understand that is how we understand how our mind works. So just to remind us, give us remind us of the context here, what we're trying to do. But before we do that, let's remind ourselves of the way to listen to Buddha's teachings. I think all the time I stress this. I think it's just so important for us. The Buddha is this person. Thank you so much. Who lived a couple thousand years ago, 2,500 or something. And who is he? What is Buddhism? Well, normally, as we know from religion, if we've been brought up as Christians, I was brought up a Christian. Excuse me. I was taught that this is information coming from God. God created it. God created me. God created the laws of morality. And God's the boss, And I'm not complaining about that. But that's not what Buddha is. And because God is the boss and because God created everything, then naturally what he says is what is to be believed and practiced. And in fact, as I asked a Catholic priest one time, and this is a really important part when you get to the purification business, what is a sin? And he said, by definition, a sin is that which goes against the will of God. He said there's natural law, but that's the main issue. But that's not the Buddhist one. Buddha is not a creator. He was a regular guy like you and me. He probably got angry and cheated on his wife and everything. I think not as Buddha, probably earlier, previous lives. But he was a regular guy. That's the point. He was meant to be a regular person who, from his own hard work, his own observation, came to see the world the way he presents it. In just the same way, like I say, that Einstein presents us with his findings about relativity. We know he didn't have a vision of it. We know it wasn't revealed to him in a dream. We know he's not speculating and making it up. I mean, that's extremely arrogant. We know that he's presenting his findings. He's not asking us to believe it, but it's his findings. Well, the Buddha's the same. So it's not a question of believing, not a question of thinking of it as kind of, something in the sky, coming from on high, which is how we're used to thinking about spiritual, which is why we have a big resistance to it. But Buddha's either right or wrong. It's up to us to find out, like Einstein. He's either right or he's wrong. It's up to us. And don't say it's science. It's not science until you've discovered it. It might be, Einstein's science, but it's not science in its own nature. It's only science when you've discovered it. Well, the same here, So, okay. Given that. So what is he saying here? He's saying we have a mind. He says that everything we think and do and say leaves imprints in that mind. And that's the meaning of karma. The word karma, like we've been talking, is the word intention. Literally everything our mind intends to do and then that it actually carries out, helped by its servants, the body and speech, programs our mind. Well, we're not surprised by that. That's what we call learning. That's what we call learning something. Learning the piano, what you're doing is that. Buddha doesn't refer to that as karma, but it is correct to say that. Anything your mind does, you program yourself to continue to do it. It's kind of obvious. It's not rocket science. Of course, the difference is Buddha's got this more radical view of mind, that it isn't physical, that it doesn't come from mother or father or a superior being. It doesn't come from nothing. That's nonsense. It can only come from previous moments of itself, just like a mug. You track it back and back and back and back, and you get back to the beginningless time, wouldn't you? You can't find the first moment of mug. Well, you can't find the first moment of your mind either, Buddha would say. So we go to this. But okay, so karma, what your mind does, it's a word you can say refers to the very movement of your mind, whatever your mind does. And why is this important for the Buddha? Because he says what our mind does produces us. That's it. We think it's our mother and father who produces. We think it's God, although we don't like to blame him, unless you're a Catholic. Unless you're unless you're an Italian. They have the rudest words for God when he doesn't do what they want, like God is a pig. I mean, we wouldn't even say that in our house. We think God would come to the ceiling and, jump on us. I think only Italians, I've never heard any other culture talk about rude words for God and Our Lady when they don't do what they want. You know? So we don't like to blame God. We're happy to blame Mummy and Daddy. Or ourselves, which is what guilt is. So the Buddha's idea of karma is so simple, but it's so different from the way we think that it's hard to hear it, like we were talking last week, you know, during the week. So basically Buddha's saying everything we think and do and say programs ourselves, produces who we are. We are the boss. What we do, say and think is the main cause of what I become, is the main cause of my suffering, is the main cause of my happiness. Outside people, mother, father, external events, of course they play a role. Whereas in our culture, though, we say they're the main cause and I'm just this victim. Whereas Buddha says, sorry, no such thing as a victim, you're the boss. And the worst part is we don't realise we're the boss. Therein is the suffering, you know. So it's not complicated what Buddha's saying, but it's just kind of outrageous. It takes time to process. So given that every single thing we think and do and say leaves an imprint in our mind, leaves tendencies in our mind, leaves a seed in our mind, programs our mind, whatever words you like, and thus will produce our future experiences. Like you know very well, playing piano today will produce your future musician. That's not cosmic. That's why we work so hard. So given that everything I think and do and say produces who I am now and in the future, and this is the point of getting down to narrow it down now, this is the fundamental law that Buddha says is the natural law that runs the universe, because his law of cause, the law of karma, he says, refers to what the mind does, but he goes on about it, he talks about it, because he says that the negative states of mind and the actions done on the basis of those with the body and speech, which is to say actions that harm others, produce what's called suffering. It's not judgment, it's not punishment, it's not reward. It's a natural law, he says. Just like an apple seed will bring an apple tree. Just like playing music wrongly will produce a lousy musician. Doing actions that are labelled negative, and that's not a moralistic term in Buddhism, it's a technical term, and we'll discuss it, will produce suffering. And that the so-called positive actions, those that will benefit others, based upon a positive state of mind, will produce happiness. It's not complicated. And why all this? Because Buddha's saying that every mind has this natural, innate potential to be free of suffering and full of happiness. That's the point of being a Buddhist. This is it, what we just said. That's it. Buddha says every mind possesses the natural potential to be free of suffering. The main cause of suffering is the mind, and the karmic imprints that are left in there by its actions of the body and speech, and that we can be free of that suffering. And the main cause of happiness is my virtuous states of mind. It isn't a complicated concept. No one judges it, no one rewards, no one's up there pulling the strings, the Buddha says. It's his observation about how things are. It's a natural law like gravity or something, you know. That's it. Not complicated. It's just that it's different from how we think, and therefore takes time to process. So given we don't want suffering, and indeed, as Buddha would suggest, we can be free of it, what a relief, we'd better find out what it is, we'd better locate what it is in our mind that is the source of it, and try to get rid of it. That's what purification means, as they call it in Buddhism. You've got to pull out the weeds, basically, before they ripen as all the misery. But there's another approach too. The second noble truth, Buddha says there are two main causes of suffering. The past action that left the seed in the mind, based upon the second cause, the delusion, and they subsume down to the one, the main causes, the delusions, the neuroses, these negative states. In relation to this, the negative states of mind, the delusions, as Lama Zopa says, there's the most urgent level of practice in day-to-day life is to at least attempt to refrain with our body, speech and mind from creating more negative karma in response to the dramas that ripen in our life, you know. That's the most immediate level of practice. Control your body, speech and mind. And now, then in relation to karma, we've got all the seeds we've had planted in the past that we need to uproot. At least temporarily, at least stop growing. You know, we only finally uproot them when we see reality, when we cut the root of neurosis that grasps at the self. But we have to delay their ripening. And this is what they call the purification practice. And like all of Buddhism, it's psychological. If it's not psychological, it's a load of rubbish, chuck it in the bin. Okay? Really. If it's just a belief system, it's complete superstition. Really and sincerely and truly. So it either is helping you cultivate your mind and work on your mind and lessen the neuroses and grow the happiness, or it's just a belief system. And that's how we think of religion. This is not appropriate, you know. It either works or it doesn't. It's either something to help your mind or it isn't. And if it doesn't, like I said, throw it away. Don't do it. So what is this purification process where this regret comes in? Well, it's there's 4 steps, basically. 4 steps. 4 psychological steps. As Omieshi says, we create negativity with our mind, and we can purify it by creating positivity with our mind. It's a practical thing, you know. So before we even get into the 4 steps, let's look at remind ourselves of what so-called negative and positive are. It's so important to remember to define our terms. Otherwise we put all these mystical, wrong meanings onto these words. Like I said, these terms, negative and positive states of mind, they're not moralistic, which is how we think of them. They're technical terms used in Buddhist psychology, which is very clear, very precise, very exact. So Buddha would say our mind, our mental consciousness consists of 3 categories of states of mind. It's not complicated. Those that are so-called positive, negative, and neutral. Well, neutral, we discussed this last week. Neutral isn't meaning neither, doesn't matter. The neutral state of mind is one that's, for example, called mindfulness or called concentration, 2 different states of mind. They're neither in their nature positive and negative. Positive states are very specific states of mind that are beneficial to others, actions, and negative actions are those that are harmful to others. They've got a certain character. But then the neutral ones are neither good nor bad. It's a question of how you use them. So mindfulness, which we think is also holy, actually the word for it is short-term memory. That's all it means, but we say it's so holy, Being mindful, I'm doing mindfulness meditation, doing short-term memory meditation, sounds depressing. It's basically short-term memory, that's all it is. Lama Yeshe would call it this. But as Lama Zopa points out, excuse me, thieves need mindfulness. It's not holy, So if you're a thief, you need mindfulness to do a good job, and if you're a meditator, you need mindfulness to do a good job. So it's up to how you use it. There are lots of those states of mind that are crucial to our functioning as a decent human being, but then in their nature, neither negative nor positive. So then we've got the negative and positive, and this is the stuff we're interested in here. And in particular, we're interested in the negative ones. The first stages of practice, we've got to deal with the negative ones. Basically, in the 3rd noble truth, as Buddha points out, we've all got this natural potential to be free of suffering. Flip it over, we've got the potential to be full of happiness, which is itself quite a shocking statement. You go to your therapist and you ask them to get rid of all neurosis, all misery, all fears, all jealousy, all depression, and have love and compassion and happiness, and totally perfectly. They'll think you're psycho and give you pills and lock you up. But this is exactly what Buddha's saying. This is his point. It's quite shocking, really. Quite a radical statement. So he's saying every mind has this potential. Another way to put that is every mind has Buddha nature. Another way to put that is every mind is naturally pure. So we can say, couldn't we, I like this analogy, that when we talk about water, we know it's pure, clear stuff, 2 bits of H and 1 bit of O. That's what it is in its nature. But we know it can be polluted. But we know the pollution is not at the core of that stuff. We know it can be removed. As they say in Buddhist psychology, it's adventitious. It means it's not integral to the water. The water doesn't need the pollution. Therefore, it's not in the bare bones of the water. Therefore, it can be extracted. This is the point that Buddha's making. Contrary to the view we all have in our materialist world, that anger, jealousy, fears, neuroses are at the core of our being. In fact, we think they're so natural. What we mean by that is that you'd be unnatural if you didn't have them. So we cling desperately to these neuroses, So tragic. Whereas Buddha says they're adventitious. They're not integral to our being. We really need to think about that because it's contrary to our experience, So this is the basis of all of Buddhist practice. This is why one would want to engage in Buddhist practice. To remove from our minds the neuroses, the delusions, the nonsense that are the source of my pain and the cause of why I harm others. What a wonderful idea. So, okay. The purification practice it's 4 steps. psychological steps. There's a different, you can order, different order. But there's a nice analogy all the lamas use, the analogy of having taken poison. So you know the very first step, if someone says, my God, Robina, you just take poison in your dinner, you're going to have the first step, which is called regret. You go, oh my God, what an idiot, I don't believe it. And then you go, quick, where's the doctor? We're very practical and sensible when it comes to this, because we know the meaning of poison is it will cause me suffering. Now, but look at, and that's what Buddha's saying. He says, you know, when you do dumb things like harming and neurotic and break, cheat on your partner and lie and badmouth and kill the cockroach and whatever, actions that are labelled negative, which are actions that necessarily harm others, based upon a negative state of mind. This is how Buddha would define a negative action, and we'll go into this in a second in more detail, which is, we did it last week, but it's so important. Well, it's still this week, isn't it? Is Saturday part of this week, or is it part of next week? It's this week. Okay, this week, earlier this week. Okay, so the first one is regret, but this is now where guilt comes in. What we have instead is guilt, and we are brilliant at it. So as His Holiness said, he points it out so sweetly one time when someone asked him to explain the difference. It's just so clear. He said, guilt, you look in the past and you go, I did that, and I did this, and I did that, and then you go, and I'm a bad person. Well, like I said, we do this automatically. We run to this instinctively. No one has to teach us this. Why? Because, as we know in Buddhist psychology, this is the dualistic view of ego grasping, that it's always finding fault. And this is anger. The difference is you're the object. Listen to anger. You did this, and you did that, and you did this, and you're a bad person. So it's identical. It is this actually the state of mind called anger. They don't have a term in Tibetan psychology, in Buddhist psychology, for guilt. But it's just called anger, but the difference is you're the object. That's all. Psychologically, it's the same state of mind. And we have it by the bucket load. Mummy didn't teach us. Don't blame the Catholic Church. You'll have to blame somebody else for putting it in our mind. No, you came with it, fully programmed, you know. And what's it based on? Attachment. And when attachment doesn't get what it wants, aversion or anger, or in this case, guilt, is the response. And it's paralyzed, it's useless, it's impotent, it's a disaster. It's terrible to have it. You know? So we have to unpack it carefully and consciously change it. So what's regret then, if it's not guilt? So simple. As His Holiness said, you look in the past and you go, I did do this, and I did do that, and I did do this. But then you go, what can I do about it? So different. But we have to cultivate that. It doesn't come naturally. I mean, I remember never forgetting hearing Martin Luther King say the same about anger. It was brilliant. He said it's okay to be angry. It's okay to say you did this and you did this and you did that. It's okay to say that. But then you go, what can I do about it? And that's compassion. It's so clear, but we have to cultivate it consciously, psychologically, cognitively, consciously cultivate this view, saying it to ourselves. And this is the first step in this psychological process called purification, which ideally one would do, you know, in our Buddhist tradition, one would do it at the end of the day. As Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, we're insane not to do this practice every day. Like you've got to pull out the weeds. Because every microsecond that you're functioning, you're sowing seeds in your mind. Karma's working. You know. It's just a natural thing. So this regret is massive. We could, spend days talking about it. So what are we going to regret? Why would we regret, and what are we going to regret? Well, at the end of the day, we check up on our day, and you would regret the actions that you've done with your body and speech, which can't be that many. I mean, there's not that many categories of actions you do with your body and speech that are harming to others. There's only so many ways to harm others. You either use your body, kill somebody or whack somebody, or take something that doesn't belong, or cheat on your partner. You're using your body. There's not that many things. Harming, based on anger, attachment. Things based on attachment. Then there's your speech. And we mightn't go around raping and killing too many people. We surely use our speech, We say harsh words. We say, words that aren't true. We say words that are just nonsense, rabbiting on about nothing, making people tired with our verbal nonsense. Or, one of the worst, we say bad things about people behind their backs. And we love to do that one. We love to do that one. We can't wait to speak out those words as soon as the person's not there. Politicians, people at work, the family, we love to find fault. Speak fault of others. One of our worst mistakes, I think. So we do these things, and we must do something in the day, you know, we're not Mother Teresa yet. So therefore, we should, at the end of the day, you should sit down and you just take stock of the day, you know, like you do some weeding. It's very reasonable. And you regret it. So you don't just go, oh, I regret this and I regret that and I regret this and then you do your vote of supplement matches. No, you've got to speak it out to yourself and change it from guilt, which is a heavy burden inside us, that aching pain and hopelessness of guilt, and you change it into regret. And this is the point about regret, which helps us, which means we have to understand karma to get this view, you know, if you want to take on the Buddhist view. You've got to say, I regret having done that because, you know what, I don't want further suffering. Which means you recognize, like with eating poison, that it will harm you. Now that takes time. We don't have that view at all. Because we have this instinctive sense of guilt, which is I'm an innocent victim and I didn't ask to get born, it's not my fault. So therefore, you know, we have this sense of trying to push it away. Guilt is pushing it away, just like blame is. So it really takes time to own what I do and say and think. To own it. That's what karma means. But recognizing, in other words, that everything necessarily that I do, say and think has consequences for me. This is a very powerful concept. We don't have this, you know. We just don't have it. We have the instinctive view of ego, which is the opposite to this, the innocent victim. So that's why guilt, for example, you know, we beat ourselves up, or we have this kind of childish view, which is very deeply instinctive within us, of trying to hide what we do. So because and this is where now a crucial difference, understanding this crucial difference, just philosophically, between the view of a creator and the view of Buddha. Because the view of the creator necessarily says God made me. So I have to own that I did something wrong, which is doing what God said not to do. And therefore, to purify it, it demands that I beg him to forgive me. Nothing wrong with that. That's not the Buddha's view. The Buddha's view is, you know, Buddha didn't create me. He is more my advisor. He's more like a doctor. He's advising me, don't kill, don't lie, don't steal. Not because he says so, which is the Christian one, but because he's saying, if you do that, Robina, that'll leave imprints in your mind that'll harm you, sweetheart. Because that's karma. You know. Just, in other words, in this context, he's exactly like a wise doctor. I might go to my doctor and he says, don't smoke, sweetheart, you might get cancer. I will thank him. I won't say, who do you think you are telling me what to do? And then I won't go home and then think, oh good, he doesn't see me, I'll smoke, I won't get cancer. We don't say that. That would be nonsense, wouldn't it? But that's what we do with Mummy and Daddy. Okay, we know kind of God is always looking, so we don't think God doesn't see it. But we certainly know this in our materialist view with Mummy, Daddy and the judges and the police. As long as they don't see me do it, I got away with it, didn't I? This is the view we have. This is the dualistic view. Buddha says it's nonsense. We know perfectly well it's nonsense. The fact that your doctor doesn't see you smoke is not the point. Because smoking itself, it's the natural law that it might bring cancer, not because your doctor says so. That's the attitude of karma, which it means we have to grow up, basically, and be responsible, be accountable. I'm the boss, Buddha says. So Buddha points out, and it's up to me, wanting to take on Buddhism in my life, to understand what he's saying and why he's saying it, and to decide that I'm taking that on board. Because I'm the boss, not Buddha. That takes time for us. It really takes time for us. Because what we have now, we have three versions, I think, of responses when we do bad things, or when bad things happen. We have guilt, we have blame, and we have denial. And that is as ridiculous as like this. There's poison in your dinner, Robina, and I go, oh, I ate poison. I'm a bad person. And you keep getting guilty, and you're getting sicker and sicker every day, but you keep beating yourself up, like as if that's important. It's meaningless, utter nonsense, useless, irrelevant. Even worse, when I discover there's poison in my dinner, who put it there? And then I proceed to continue to smoke cigarettes while I'm, suing Marlboro through the hole in my throat, blaming Marlboro. Yeah. Excuse me. Well, the third one, there's poison in your dinner, Robina? No, there's not. We have that one, denial. So these are all these are all psychologically, the Buddhist, you would say, the response of having this ego grasping and all these dualistic delusions, which takes time to see, it's quite a remarkable view that Buddha has. I mean, not that I know anything, but it sounds so arrogant as if I know it's remarkable, but whatever. So this regret, this first step in this process of changing my mind, based upon this idea that my mind is the creator of my experiences, based upon the idea that what a negative state of mind is, that one that pollutes my mind and will ripen as my future suffering, and therefore, knowing I don't want suffering, it would demand that therefore the first step is regret. I must regret it. Oh my God, what a fool, I've eaten poison. What can I do? I don't want the suffering. So it's sort of like compassion for yourself, and you've got to cultivate this. Many of us are Buddhist already, and we take, say for example, we do this practice, as we all know, which we'll talk about, the third step, called Vajrasattva, this particular mantra. We all say, oh yeah, I did my Vajrasattva mantras, I've done my mantras, but that's not enough, that's only the third step. You need all four. All four function, in Buddhist terms, to purify the mind. You can't just have one. And regret is crucial. Lama Zopa says it's the most important. If you don't open the door of acknowledging what you said and done and thought that will produce your future suffering, how can you move forward? How can you purify anything? Just psychologically, it wouldn't work. So this is a huge step. And this one is one of accountability. And as I said, it's like compassion for yourself. The Lamas wouldn't use that term, but it really is a good way to put it. And so guilt is like hate for yourself. Guilt is self-hate. We're sort of attached to it. So bizarre. We're like attached to stabbing ourselves, it's kind of weird. As Buddha says, as my mother would say, we're our own worst enemies. And it's true. It's awful. It's heartbreaking. So we've got to be accountable. We've got to grow up. And learn to be my own best friend. This is the idea of rejection. So when you do the practice, of course, you go over the things you've done today, and then you think of all the things you've done in this life that you've forgotten. Because just because you forgot that you ate the chocolates 2 days ago doesn't mean it won't come out in the rash. You don't have to remember what action you did for it to bring the consequences. So we regret anything we've done, even though we don't remember, that have harmed others, because I don't want the future suffering. So a negative action is defined as one that harms another. This is a really crucial point to remember. Really, we did this again, we spoke about this during the week. This is a really major point. If I am a Christian, then a negative action, like I said, a sin is going against God's will. That's what defines it as wrong. It's because God said don't do it. That's what makes it wrong. But here, the Buddha, you ask the Buddha what's a negative action, he says it's a relative reality, it's a convention, you can prove it. You just do a bit of market research in this room. You ask everybody, do you like being lied to? Do you like being stolen from? Do you like being cheated? Do you like being punched in the nose? We know the answer. Well, that proves that's what a negative action is. It's a dependent arising, like everything else. It's a convention. By agreement, punching in the nose is considered a negative action, but not in its nature. In my Kung Fu class, it wasn't considered wrong. That was the goal, to punch you in the nose. And then if you got me in the nose, I'm supposed to apologise to you. So, it depends. It's not an absolute. This is the point. Negativity is not an absolute. It's a dependent arising. It's by agreement, it's convention. And we can prove it easily enough, get a general view of society in Boston, in this country. There are variations, of course. But in general, we can see that sentient beings don't like being harmed. Pretty obvious. Check the ant, check the dog, check the human. Pretty reasonable. So then, that's a negative action, Buddha says. But the difference here is this, and this is again a major point to make the distinction. What is it when you do it that makes you create negative karma? It's not the fact that it's a negative action. And this we did again in the week, but let's do it now in this context here. It's so important, this one. This is the Mahayana interpretation. I have that mouse in my kitchen. In order for me to create the negative karma of killing, there need to be 4 steps. A complete action, There need to be 4 steps in place, 4 components in that action. There has to be the object, very clearly, a mouse, a living mouse. There has to be the intention to do it, and that's the main, that's the real meaning of the word karma, intention. The thought, I will kill. That's the meaning of karma. Karma, really, we use the word in a very colloquial, incorrect way. That's the literal meaning of the word karma, intention. It's also translated as action, but intention is the most tasty. It's the action of the mind. Intention, I will kill. Then you've got the action, I will do it, and then the mouse dies. Those 4. That's a complete action. Well, they say when the mouse dies before you, strictly speaking. And a complete action is what leaves seed in your mind that will ripen as suffering lives in the future. Okay, so let's look at intention. We have to unpack it. Behind the intention, we know this, and everything we intend to do, unless we're out of our brain completely, behind, packed into it, is always, as we call it in the West, a reason. What are you going to kill the mouse for, Robina? Well, what do you think? I hate mice. Come on. I'm attached to my mouse-free kitchen, so how dare a mouse be in my kitchen, which is aversion, anger, so then I decide to kill it. That's, of course, look at the killing actions in this world. Why do you think most people kill? Because they have anger. It's very obvious. There are those who kill with attachment, like the fisherman. That's different. If I was attached to eating the mouse legs for breakfast, like I say, I'd kill it very nicely and sweetly. I wouldn't stomp on it, I wouldn't have anger. So anger is the usual reason packed into the intention to kill. We don't ever distinguish, but we need to separate and see. And this now is the point of the Mahayana. The motivation, the reason is the main thing. Now Norma has a mouse in her kitchen, let's say. That's Norma. The mouse is there, she intends to kill it, she does the action, the mouse dies. But let's look at her intention. Let's unpack that. And she, so when she sees the mouse, she didn't mean to, but she hurt it, and now she sees it's really suffering. And so she has compassion. Oh my God, poor little mouse. What can I do to help it? And then she, like most of us in the world, would think it's cool to kill it, because that'll stop its suffering. So what's in her mind? There's no wish to harm the mouse. She's in fact crying with compassion for the mouse. She wants to help the mouse stop suffering. That's called compassion. That's incredible. That's the complete opposite to mine. The intention to kill it is exactly the same, but the motivation is different. That is what determines the character of the action I do, and thus the future consequences. My anger, my wish to harm the mouse. Hers is the wish to help the mouse. Now, as to whether she did, that's another discussion. And more than likely Buddha says she didn't. Because why? Because she didn't have wisdom. So a really perfect action is not only a compassionate action, but it has to be an action that actually does benefit the recipient. As His Holiness says, compassion is not enough. You need wisdom. But at least from Norma's point of view, the karma she creates, because of her motivation, she does not create negative karma, meaning she doesn't put a negative seed in her mind. You could say that. It's more subtle than all this, it's more complex, but this is a really simple example. Whereas mine, because of my wish to harm. So literally what Buddha's saying is, what your mind wants to do is what the karma is. What's in your mind is what the karma is. Which is why we don't know anybody's mind, so you can't judge. Just because you see a person kill, you don't know. You don't sit there and go, oh, okay, you could be a saint, let him kill. No. But if you haven't got the wisdom, be careful. And now John might have a mouse in his kitchen, and he doesn't even see it. He's cooking the lunch for Norma. There's John, behind the pillar. But he doesn't even see the mouse, and he stands on it, and it's squelch, dead mouse. So now we have 3 dead mice. They don't care, they're all dead. They've got their own karma happening. But I killed one with anger, therefore created negative karma. Norma kills one with compassion, therefore creates virtuous karma. John doesn't create any karma. Why? Because there's no intention. Intention equals karma. His body did the action, the mouse was there, and the mouse died. But the crucial piece was missing. His mind wasn't engaged in it, therefore no karma. These are simple examples, but the point of this is to point out this distinction between the intention to do it and why doing it, and how the reason behind the motivation is the key factor that creates our karma. So it's not because killing is a bad action that you create negative karma. It's because you wanted to harm them out that it becomes negative karma, which is why people kill in the end, normally. This is such an important point to remember. So, regret. I have to sit down at the end of the day and take stock of my day, and then take stock of my life, and regret any action that I've done that's negative, that has harmed another. And you have to say it, because I am sick of suffering, because I don't want further suffering. You've got to say that, because otherwise it just feels like guilt. We just launch into the self-pity of guilt. Impotent guilt, useless guilt. More anger. It's terrible. It's heartbreaking. Destroying us. We've got to speak it out like this, because I'm sick of suffering. We have to know we're sick of suffering. We have to feel our own suffering, and that takes time. We think everybody else is suffering. We don't think we're suffering. Okay, let's look at suffering. 4 noble truths. First noble truth, Buddha says there's suffering. The first kind is what we all accept is suffering. And when we use the word suffering in this life, this is the one we mean. And he calls it the suffering of suffering. When the bad things happen, the punches in the nose, the husband leaves me for a younger version, that kind of thing. The war zones. That's what we mean by suffering, is when the bad things happen. So in our normal world, because of us having, we've got a bit of money in the bank, and maybe have a partner, and maybe we've got a home, and we're reasonably not completely out of our brains with suffering, and we've got reasonable lives, we assume we don't have much suffering. But the Buddha says this gross one, the suffering of suffering, is just the tip of the iceberg. The second one, the suffering of change, he calls it, kind of innocuous, but it's got profound meaning. This is the one we're all living in, we're drowning in it. This is the inner prison, as Lama Zopa Rinpoche said. When the very first prisoner, this young Mexican guy, wrote to us when I was doing this prison project work for years, back in '96 I got this letter from this young man, and there he was, 18 years old, in this cell, probably double the size of one of these, no, maybe about the size of this bathroom here, with a bathtub in it and a sink and a toilet. They're about 8 foot by 10 foot. The cell, maybe a bit less than that, but no windows, air conditioning and lights on all the time, and there are 2 people in it, 2 bunks, and these people live in these top security prisons. They live in these cells 23 hours a day, with another cell walking up and down with the shackles on for another hour, 1 hour a day. And they're allowed to have 10 books on the inside of a pen, because you can use the outside to stab your cellmate. And you have you drink Kool-Aid for drinks, because you can use hot drink to tip on your cellmate. Kind of limited, intensely suffering, what we'd call the first kind of suffering. And Lama Zopa wrote, some of these prisoners would write to Rinpoche, and then one he would often say in these 18-page letters to them of advice, and he'd say things like this, and he said this to Arturo. This is shocking to us. He said, your prison's nothing in comparison with the inner prison of ordinary people, and that's us. The prison of attachment, the prison of anger, the prison of pride, the prison of depression. And this is what Buddha's point is. This second kind of suffering that Buddha would refer to as the suffering of change, which broadly speaking though refers to the suffering of the neuroses, the suffering of fear and attachment and anger and jealousy, the stuff that we are overwhelmed by. Okay, we mightn't be homeless. We mightn't be starving. We might have somebody brutalizing us every day, which preoccupies you if you have it. But we have the inner suffering. And of course we don't pay attention to this because we feel guilty of that. We think, I shouldn't be suffering. I've got a couple of husbands and 2 kids and whatever you've got. You think I've got a decent life. I shouldn't be suffering. But look at our panic attacks. Look at our fears every day. Look at our depression, our anxiety, our self-hate. What do you think that is? And when we start to get into this, and as Lama Zopa says, we start to really get into this and see it, not self-pity-wise, but see the depths of the misery of it. We'll begin to understand the meaning of suffering. And this is not even the subtlest suffering yet. All-pervasive suffering. Forget that one. So we have to learn to know our own minds, which is why, as Lama Yeshe says, we need to be our own therapists. We need to know our minds. This is the unique approach in your world. So the more we can see our minds, the more we can see our own neuroses and fears and rubbish and nonsense, the more we'll have some kindness towards ourselves because we're sick of suffering. And the more we'll see the dumb things we do with our body and speech that harm me, the more I will regret it, the more I will be sad for what I'm doing to myself. We've got to have that, not guilt. Then we can take the next step in a really healthy way. What can I do about it? Where's the doctor? Who can I turn to? So here, this is the second step. It's called reliance. The first part, 2 parts, is refuge, as they call it in Buddhism. Refuge. You rely upon a decent doctor. Again, this is, again, the crucial difference here in, say, between our Christian teachings and indeed in our materialist approach, where we desperately feel we need someone to forgive us. This is a very fascinating thing, psychologically. I'm not trying to sound too cruel about it, but mostly our wish for others to forgive us is attachment to how people think about us. Because attachment to our own attachment, this craving to getting what I want every second, and this, one of the deepest of these attachments is this craving to have other people approve of me. So when I do something bad to my partner, yet again, mainly I'm having a panic attack that he's going to reject me. I'm desperate to look him in the eye and see that he doesn't hate me yet. Please forgive me, I'll say. And he said, it's all right, Robina. I'll be so relieved one time. But mainly that's ego. I'm sorry to say. Mainly. Because it's just, thank God I got away with it. Oh, thank God. So we don't say that, but thank God he hasn't rejected me. We're frantic to have someone to forgive us. You know? So of course if someone doesn't forgive us, and because we assume we're a bad person, and I'm not trying to be rude about our Christian teachings because I think it's an amazing view, we do indeed in the Christian teachings need God to forgive us. But the Buddha's approach is got nothing to do with Buddha. He's not my creator. He's just my doctor. I don't go to my doctor and beg him to forgive me for smoking. He wants me to give up smoking. He's giving me the advice. Buddha's like this. Yeah, of course he would forgive you. He's a very nice person. But it's not the point. Forgiveness doesn't purify. It's useful. It's wonderful. And it's wonderful to apologize to somebody. All of that's very healing. It's crucial. But it's not what fundamentally changes your mind. You are the one who has to purify yourself. So you have to regret it and be sick of the suffering. And then you will do something to change it because it's up to you. It's nice to be forgiven. But what if your mother's dead? Too late, she can't forgive you. Many of our friends in prison who kill people will be overwhelmed by grief and guilt and shame. Now that they can't forgive me, what can I do? That's not the point. You can change your own mind. There's no karma, as Lama Yeshe says, you can't purify. There's no imprint you can't remove. They're all impermanent. How can there not be something that can't be purified? Impossible. So the second step, the relationship we have with the Buddha is as a doctor. Best way to say it. So that means you better check he's a decent doctor, isn't it? You don't go to some doctor because he's got a cute nose. You go because you've checked up and he's a valid doctor. And the second reason for going to a doctor is that you want his medicine because you don't want suffering. This is the basis of refuge. You've got to know the Buddha's a decent person, a valid person, so you've got to check up on the Buddha and his teachings and his methods and have confidence in them. And then second, you've got to be sick of suffering. You've got to want his methods. That's refuge. It's a genuine psychological state from in your mind that you come to. That's refuge. First part of reliance. Second part of reliance is curious that it's called reliance, and it's where you now cultivate compassion for others. So why is it under the heading reliance? It's the way they talk in Tibet. Here the main point is the first step is like compassion for myself. It's the first stages of the practice based upon the view of karma, that I'm being accountable for my actions. It's renunciation, as they call it. It's like compassion for yourself. You want to renounce suffering, as it's called. It's because you're sick of suffering. It's like compassion for yourself. Now we have compassion for those we've harmed. So here I'm trying to cultivate compassion. So clearly, what I need most in my life in order for me to cultivate compassion is people who are the objects of compassion. That's called suffering people. So in that sense they say we rely upon suffering sentient beings. We need suffering sentient beings. I don't mean we need them to suffer, but in a literal sense, that without suffering sentient beings, it is impossible to have compassion. How can you have empathy for suffering of others if you don't mean suffering? So you've got to have suffering. Doesn't mean you have to have it. Please don't misunderstand this. In order for me to cultivate suffering, I need there to be suffering sentient beings there. I don't want them to suffer. I wish they'd all stop suffering. But it's grist from my mill, to hear the meaning there. I hope you don't misunderstand that. So here, now I think about those I've harmed. And I have compassion for them. I regret for their sake. I must purify for their sake. And then even if we can, strong, most powerful, have compassion for those who have harmed us. And why would we do that? Well, to understand this step, we have to understand the meaning of compassion. The meaning of it. Well, as the Lamas say, you can't possibly have compassion until you've got renunciation. In other words, you cannot have compassion for another's suffering until you've got compassion for your own suffering. It's not possible. It's impossible. What's the logic of that? Well, this first stage, this one of renunciation or compassion for yourself, regretting your own suffering because you're sick of suffering, that's the actual accomplishment is called renunciation. It's got two parts. The first one is you recognize that you're sick of suffering. You realize, I am sick of suffering. But the crucial piece is the second one. Is I know now that I am the cause of it because of my past negative karma and my neurotic, ridiculous states of mind. Not guilt, but this is just the Buddha's view, isn't it? That we're all the creators of ourselves. From infinite past lives. We're not made by somebody else. So when I've got that recognition, I'm sick of suffering and I know why, then there's only one choice. I will do something about it. That's renunciation. So when I've got that, now I'm qualified to have compassion, because compassion is identical, except the object is others. So you see someone else suffering, and you go, oh my God, look at that suffering. It's unbearable. First step. But the second one is now you know why they're suffering. Because of their karma and their delusions. Whereas you look at the way we think of compassion now. We have compassion now only for innocent victims. And it's usually children and animals. We love to have compassion for children and animals. That's about it, But that's based, so that's based upon the view, is it not, that we didn't ask to get born, that it's not my fault, and it's not their fault. That's what innocent victim means. But as we know from the Buddha's view about karma, philosophically speaking, he says there's no such concept as this. Everybody's got beginningless mind. Everybody is experiencing the fruits of all their past good and their past non-virtue, just naturally. So every sentient being is experiencing whatever they created. Therefore, no concept of so-called innocent victim. Whereas, of course, if you were created by your mother and your father, then you can accurately say you are an innocent victim. And that's why we have that view, innocent victim, because we assume most of us were indeed. We assume all of us. We assume that mummy and daddy made us. But for the Buddha, that's not how it is. So we've got to look at our assumptions very clearly. We've got to unpack our assumptions very clearly. Be logical about it. So compassion then, with this view in mind, has to be not only for those whom I harm, but for those who harm me, because they are harming themselves. That's the reason to have compassion. So you have compassion for the dog when you see the guy kick the dog, because you realise that the dog created the cause itself to be kicked from past lives. And you have compassion for it, because it's also suffering right now as well, 2 reasons. The first suffering and the second one. And for the person who's kicking the dog, you have compassion for them. Even more compassion for them. The dog is just finishing its karma. The man's just beginning it. Bodhisattvas have more compassion for the harmers, for the crazies, than for the victims. This is the logic of it. So again, we really have to think about this carefully. And once we've got it for ourselves, once we've got renunciation, then it's easy to have this compassion for all sentient beings. For those who harm you, for those who harm others, for the brutalisers, for the murderers, for the 1%ers who are greedily taking all the money, or whatever. Not just for the poor people and the sick people and the little doggy woggies and the pussy wussies, which we love to have compassion for now, because it's sentimental for them. We've got to really think this stuff through. So compassion. Yeah, this kind of compassion, I always think of it as a bit like the compassion of a mother for her child, you know. This junkie kid. Everybody else hates him. He lies, he steals, he's a drag to be around. But she, her heart breaks for him because she can see he's harming himself. And that's this compassion. Once we've got renunciation, then we can have this one. Not a problem. We have to really think it through because it's not what we think now. So now we go to the third step. We put our money where our mouth is. We take the medicine. So this, the third one often is called, in terms of the 4 R's here, because it's easy to remember, regret, reliance, the remedy, resolve. But this third one is referred to usually as the antidote. It's the actual, where you take the medicine. That is the direct antidote to the poison, to the negative state of mind, negative karmic imprint. So anything there can be, anything that's the opposite of the action you're regretting is purification. If you regret killing, you go off and save a life. That's the opposite of killing. That helps purify it. Of course it does. You help people who are sick. You regret lying, you make sure you tell the truth. Every opposite action is itself a natural purification. But of course in this tradition, all the lamas and all the traditions strongly praise certain practices that are said to be very potent medicines, potent antidotes. So any practices we know that involve the visualization of the Buddha, his was saying, the recitation of the mantras, and one needs to look into this carefully, but just believe in it. They are said to be super powerful antidotes. So all the lamas would praise this particular practice called Vajrasattva. It's the Buddha in the Bodhisattva path, a white manifestation of Vajradhara. Who actually white in this sense and holding a Dorjian belt because he represents emptiness. And finally, because the main purification of our mind is when we realise emptiness, which might not be so evident to us now. But let's see if we can unpack that one, see if we can understand it. So let's, hang on. Okay, ask me some questions about what we've discussed so far, the first 2 steps of purification. Nobody?
I have a question.
Where are you?
Over here.
Okay.
As one goes through the purification process, just focusing on regret, and coming from the same tradition that you were raised in, that's a purification process, but it's very, very transactional. I regret eating meat on Friday. Ego tips, all gone. As you can only, if you're doing an examination of conscience.
What's on, sorry, what?
Your sin is forgiven. If you confess a sin,
yes,
it's forgiven.
Yes,
on
good.
the spot, done.
Yes, yes,
Do
yes.
your penance, 3 Hail Marys.
Yes.
And if one is going through that process, one can only remember what one did in terms of non-virtue in this life.
So I'm a bit confused now.
Okay.
So you're talking about the Catholic one, which we have become
just only as a benchmark.
and nothing wrong with that one, so that's fine. So now
But
talking
using
about
it as a benchmark, in our tradition, you're not only regretting what you did in this life, but you're regretting what you did in past lives, which is an immense amount of negative karma, immeasurable negative karma. What is it precisely that one should be regretting? What one did in this life, what one did in past lives?
Okay.
And how much karma is erased in any particular, because it's some zero in the Catholic tradition.
No, okay. It's, if we understand it in this kind of incremental psychological way, which it is, then it's like asking the question, how much practice do I have to do to become perfect at piano? So how much practice do I have to do before my mind is purified? Well, it's the same thing. The more you do it, the more effort you put into something, the more likely you are to succeed. As it's a natural psychological process, and you're trying to change your mind from being negative and having negative tendencies to positive tendencies. Would you not agree with that? Would you agree with that?
Yes.
So then the same way that if you don't know how to play piano, which is the status quo before you begin, that's the ignorance. And then how much do I need to do to perfect my mind? Well, best is to practice 8 hours a day for 30 years and you might get a bit close. So if you just do it once a day, obviously you don't get very far. So the same answer here. The more you work on your mind, the more you do all the things, the more you change your mind, the more you analyse it, the more you think about it, the more you regret, the more you determine, the more you do your practice, the more likely it is that you'll change your mind. It's a logical thing. Do you see my point? Does that answer your question? You don't look like it does.
I think it does.
Well, say some more. But you said, what should I regret?
Well, one can regret, one can remember the
Doesn't matter what
non-virtues from
remember.
this life,
Yeah.
but when it comes to past lives.
But it doesn't matter about remember, does it? If you're trying to be a Buddhist and you study Buddhist psychology and you know the names of the negative states of mind, you even know these ones of the body and the speech. And you know you've had countless lives. You know you've been an animal countless times. You know you've been a human countless times. You take that on board. You take it as your hypothesis. So logically, there are an awful lot of seeds in there from those actions. So then you regret the lot.
Okay.
You just say, you cover the lot. Anything I've ever done since beginningless time to harm any sentient being, I regret, because you know what? I don't want the suffering.
Okay.
So you cover everything. You don't have to remember, You see? Does that answer that part?
Yes, it does.
And it's just how much effort you put into your entire practice, like with playing the piano, like with learning maths, that you'll get the results, isn't it? Because this is a psychological process. What do you think? Does it make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Arnold Palmer, golf is a game of luck. Golf is a game of luck. And I've learned the more I practice, the luckier I get.
There you go. There you go. Anyone else? Any other questions? Yes, go. I forget your name again. Your name. When you get the mic. What's your name?
Nick.
Nick. Okay, Nick, go on.
So I have the sense sometimes that, when I do something bad and I'm guilty about it, the strong sense of me that I tie to that action.
Yes.
In some way, and because I care about me, it helps motivate some new process to change myself. So how do I remove the sense of I from this guilt and cultivate regret, but still simultaneously sustain the motivation to cultivate myself to change?
Sure.
If there's no action.
This is where the understanding of how the I really exists, isn't it, Nick? We discussed this all last night. It's the question of this understanding of the distinction between how ignorance, the root delusion, grasps the self-existent me, which is what produces the neurotic guilt, and then the reasonable sense of me, which is the me of dependent arising, me, Nick, who did this and did this and did that and understands karma, because karma anyway is an example of dependent arising. So you just slowly, you intellectually first understand it, but the more there is the grasping at I, the more that would just be guilt and shame and fear and neurosis. The more it's reasonable, the more you do think it's reasonable, that means you're grasping less at the I and seeing it more in a sensible, conventional sense. That's the proof of it. If we've got a lot of grasping at the I, it'll only ever be guilt. There's no other option. Do you see what I'm saying? So the thought, the regret is an example, is an indicator of less grasping at the I. The way we've described regret. It's seeing it as dependent arising and there's nothing fixed in stone. That's what it means. That's why you've got confidence that you can change. But if you're stuck in guilt, and that means you're stuck in the self-pity me, which is ego grasping, which means nothing can change and I'm hopeless and it's useless. That is the actual expression of the clinging to the self. But if you have the view of regret, which is an expression of dependent arising, which means it's okay, I can change, that's already showing you're lessening the grasping. Are you seeing my point?
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess my difficulty lies in, it's only practical to acknowledge that I am in this state of delusion, always grasping at this I.
That's right.
So to the extent that I rely on this sense of I as motivation to
No,
change
you're not
myself.
relying on the sense of I. You're mistaking the neurotic I for the reasonable I.
No, right, I'm acknowledging that I do that, but I guess I have embedded in that belief that I want to change me to improve
But you do want to
myself.
change you,
Yeah,
but not the self-existent I, because there isn't such a thing.
okay.
What I'm trying to say is, there is a Nick conventionally, and there is not the fantasy Nick that is the clinging, grasping, neurotic, fear-based one. So even intellectually distinguishing between those is already fine, slowly, slowly. Otherwise you're going to chuck the baby out of the bathwater. So it's you know, it's tricky.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks. Someone else? Yes.
Hi.
Hi, sweetheart.
I was wondering if you could clarify something for me. I understand, our karma follows us from lifetime to lifetime, but if we don't have an actual self, how does karma follow a non-self and manifest in a way that produces the self?
It's a question of knowing what self means, isn't it?
Well, yes, and then...
Well, it is. I'm telling you it is. So then you have to, once we get the right definition of which self you're talking about, are you talking about the self-existent self, which means there's not that one, and if you're talking about the conventional self, there is that one. So then now that you know that, what's your question again?
Sure. So my question is, I understand the conventional self, but
You do? Oh, good.
But what I'm thinking of as the non-self. So the
Right, darling?
well, how there is no sense of self, the emptiness of the self, and how
No, you just said you accept the conventional self.
I accept that it exists.
What is the conventional self?
I think the conventional self is myself as Erica, who I am today. But I know that Erica hasn't been traveling through life.
No, that's not your conventional self.
That's not my conventional self. Okay, so then I am confused.
Huh?
I am confused.
So conventional self, the way they'd say it is the dependent arising Erica. The Erica that's come into existence and depends upon causes and conditions, but among which you won't find this Erica. The Erica that exists and depends upon the parts, but among which you won't find Erica. And then finally, the Erica that is the basis of the label Erica. So when we understand dependent arising, then you'll understand conventional self. So there is an Erica, there is negative karma, there is a mind stream that exists from beginningless time and will go forward. There is all those things conventionally, but they're not existing from their own side. It's the understanding of that that is the answer to your question, and that takes time.
Thank you.
I mean, you don't have to be satisfied with that answer. You can always keep arguing.
Well, I think when you said the endless mind stream, that made sense for me.
Okay. Because in the same way, okay, let's use an ordinary example. Erica today, how old is Erica now?
Oh goodness, 31.
Okay, so Erica is not 26 anymore, right?
Okay.
But we could track back, if you had perfect memory, or if I had perfect memory, or you in particular, you could track back Erica to when she was 26. And that was Erica then. Now you agree, don't you, that there is a continuity between there and the 26-year-old Erica, even though there's nothing left of the 26-year-old Erica at all. But everything Erica did then, including playing the piano every day, is why at 31 Erica can play the piano. So it proves what you did when you were 26 comes forward into the 31-year-old Erica, but there's no longer the 26-year-old left. So then the mind will continue after this life. It won't be labelled Erica, but every imprint of everything you put in the mind, it's just inexorable, can only propel forward with those imprints and will manifest as those imprints. No longer called Erica.
This is another question though. So if that's all in my mind stream, is that accessible at some point, or is that
What do you mean accessible?
accessible to a state where?
To you,
Yes.
yes. Buddha says everything is knowable. That's how come he posits the possibility of freedom from suffering. Eventually you have to know your mind so well that you will do the uprooting of every single negative state from it. No one else will but you. So you must access it all. If you don't, you can't get any realization. That's what the job of being a Buddhist is. Do you hear me?
Yes.
That's why you need single point of concentration. So you go to the depths of your mind and unpack it all, unravel it, deconstruct it until eventually you've argued so clearly and so subtly and so sophisticatedly with all the lies in your mind that you've removed them completely. Then you are free of suffering, baby. So if they're not accessible, then forget it. They are, necessarily. There's nothing that exists that can't be known by your mind. That's the point. Do you see?
Yes.
Okay, good. Just hard work, that's all. Yes, Sharon?
if you have a situation and it's, you start out with a good motivation, and then it turns bad, and...
What do you mean, you're meant to be nice to somebody and they ended up punching you in the nose, or you punch him in the nose?
Yeah.
You mean you punch him in the nose? Okay,
Yeah,
well, you made a mess, right, go on.
you're nice, you're trying to resolve a situation, and you're trying to do it with the motivation to be helpful
To whom?
to the other person.
Oh, okay.
So both people can work together in the
Okay.
situation.
Okay,
So you can manage to do an activity together
okay,
and make it work.
okay.
And it ends up going bad in the long run.
Mhm.
And you realize the bad part was the anger part, but you're not.
The what?
The part that you regret is the anger part.
Okay.
And you said a lot of things and you don't feel you regret anything you said, but others are saying I should regret it.
What do you mean you don't regret having said it?
What
What do you mean by that?
Like, I believe things like need to be said sometimes. Like, you say it as it is, and,
Okay, so we have to analyze that action. Let's analyze the action. Okay, so there was the action called speaking words to somebody. And were those harsh words or kind words? They were praising words or critical words?
they were
Probably critical.
they were letting people know information.
No, were they critical or praise?
They were critical of
There
the
you go,
information.
now we're getting there. So there are words of criticism to another person.
Yeah.
And the reason in your mind to say these critical words to this person was?
To get information across.
No, that's not a reason.
Well-
What was the, there's either there's only two reasons. One is to benefit yourself in a good way, or one is to benefit the other person. Was it to benefit them or benefit you?
Both.
How would it benefit you by criticizing someone else?
Because it's an organization.
Huh?
It's an organization. I said things that I don't remember that I totally said. And people are saying that I said certain things and did certain things.
Uh-huh.
And how do you regret something that you don't know if you totally said all that and you
Okay,
just
that's
take
a different
it from what you
discussion.
said? Yeah,
That's a different discussion.
that's
Okay.
where I'm trying to get.
Okay. So, first of all, there's a point here about, let's just say you were right in what you were saying. Let's say you are correct in your assessment of this organization going in the wrong direction. Let's say you're correct, right? That could be reasonable. That could be so, couldn't it? But the point is that's not, and that you do want to help, that's even good too. But that's not enough to say things. You have to have the wisdom to be confident that it will bring results. And obviously it didn't. So therefore, it didn't help. So sometimes there's no point in saying anything. If you don't have confidence that those words will be heard correctly and implemented, then you're wasting your breath and you're getting yourself into trouble. So the point is here, you didn't intend to harm anybody. Is that correct?
Correct.
You're sure about that?
I'm sure.
You're really positive you
I'm
didn't
really
want to harm.
positive.
Well then okay, but it feels like they've been harmed.
Right.
Well that's their
what I'm
problem.
being told.
You didn't create negative karma then. But you just got them to dislike you. So you've got extra trouble from it. You understand?
Yeah.
So you have to learn from that. So if you harm somebody and you meant to harm them, then that's negative karma. It seems like they feel harmed by you. So if you think you didn't mean to harm them, then you didn't do something negative. But also the fact that they feel harmed, maybe there's a learning in that for you as well. But the real learning is you wasted your breath. There was no point in saying it, which means we've got to look at our urgency to say something. And often it is for our own benefit, and it doesn't. It's because we feel we must say it. It doesn't help. And that's how most of us run around helping each other, and we make a great big mess because we lack the wisdom. So best sometimes is just shut your mouth and accept. That's the learning. What do you think?
Yeah.
Okay. Someone else, please. So we can get on and finish the last one. Oh, we've got time. Yeah, okay. Someone else?
Yeah, so I'm having a little trouble here understanding this idea of cultivating regret. So regret you see as a good thing.
Regret is the acknowledgement that you did something, in this case to harm another, based upon a negative state of mind that will produce future suffering for you. That's the meaning of this regret. So if you're discussing that one, let's discuss it. If you mean something else, please define your terms.
I'm not sure, maybe you can help me out as I continue.
Okay.
So that just seems like dwelling on something that,
Oh, you're not hearing it then, at all.
that's what I'm asking.
Good. So let's say
Can I ask I'm sorry, can I ask
Oh,
that?
no, yeah.
The example, your work with the prisoners I find very interesting, because I was talking to Sean about this last night, is there's a environment where you have people, if they want to choose to use that time, have so much time to use. And those people must have so many regrets.
Why?
So,
No, I mean, many of them are better than you, they just got caught. Or they just got wrongly blamed. Believe me, especially in this country, it's one of the worst prison systems in the world. So never mind, don't have that assumption, I'm sorry your point. Go
Okay.
on, what's the question?
how is regretting helping them to avoid suffering?
Okay, so you're not, so that's, okay, what that means is, and that's fine, you're not hearing the definition that I'm using, so let's go more deeply into it. If you are a gardener and you planted a whole pile of seeds in the ground that you discovered later were bad seeds, and you're going to get terrible weeds from it, what would be your attitude? What would you think? You just put the seeds in the ground yesterday, let's say, and you discovered that they're going to bring terrible, terrible junk in your garden. What would you think? What would be your attitude?
Planting seeds.
Oh, sweetheart, you're not listening. You'd be too intellectual. If you're a gardener, and the gardener's job is to have a beautiful garden, right? And you're trying to grow delicious vegetables and roses and potatoes, and you discovered you grew terrible things instead, and someone points it out, what would you think right now? What would you do with that information? What would you say to yourself? What would you do about it? Sweetie, what would you do about it?
Rip up the old.
Thank you very much. Why would you rip them out? Go back. What was your psychological approach to it? What would be the attitude? What would you say when I point out you actually sowed terrible things? What would you go? What would you say?
I'd be unhappy that.
Why would you be unhappy?
Because I was trying to make good things.
Right, so then that's called regret. And why do you regret putting them in? Why? Why would you regret having put those seeds in the ground?
Because I wanted a positive result.
Because you wanted nice, because you know it'll ripen as suffering for you. You know it'll ripen as a lousy garden. Oh my God, what an idiot. I don't believe I planted those seeds. I'm going to get a terrible garden here. And then what would you do about it? Pull them out. That's called regret. Can you hear it?
Yes,
Can you really hear it?
I think so.
If you eat poison, if there's poison in your dinner, someone points out you ate poison, what would you say? What would be your response to it?
I would get upset.
And what would you do then?
Try to remove it.
Precisely. So if you can acknowledge, listen to the Buddhist teaching, which would say that everything you think with your mind and do with your actions, if it's called negative, you sow a seed in your mind that will ripen in the future as your suffering, Buddha says. So do you want suffering in the future?
No.
Okay, so therefore the attitude is, oh my God, what an idiot, I killed and lied and stole. I regret having done that, what a dummy. What can I do about it? How can I remove those seeds from my mind?
But those are two cases where the examples you just used, where you planted seeds that didn't produce a nice garden. Well, how is that your fault that you chose seeds that were bad? Or the case where you said...
Who cares whose fault is it, dear?
Well, it's not
Who cares whose fault is it? The fact is you did it. If you're going to go, well, whose fault is it? Meanwhile, all the ugly things ripen. What good is that to you?
But both of those cases, you don't have intent. You talked about intent before. The case where you regret something that you intended to do harm to someone versus the cases where you got sick from being poisoned.
Okay, that's another issue that even makes it more powerful then. So you intend, so then still, that's not the point, is it? Still, you don't remember having done it. You don't remember intending to kill. You even thought once that killing was good, let's say. People who were a fisherman thought killing was good. That, just like you thought those seeds were good. That's the point. You thought killing was good, and you went happily to your fishing every day. And then you listen to Buddha's view, and you start to think differently, and you realise, wow, maybe I was misguided, maybe I was deluded then. So you think, what an idiot! I better pull those seeds out. So what the issue for you is? It's fascinating. The issue for you then is, you said it's not my fault.
I just see the regret being differently in different cases. Something that you...
Okay, who cares whose fault it is? If you can establish that whatever your mind did, based upon the time you did it, out of ignorance or anger or jealousy or neurosis or ignorance, you now listen to a new view that points out to you that your botany methods weren't so cool. You've planted wrong seeds. Then you go, oops, a daisy, what an idiot I was. I had ignorance then. Maybe I better do something about it. But just because it's not your fault, who cares whose fault it is? If you think that way. Like, you know, I didn't know I planted bad seeds. Well, I'm not going to pull them out. Well, who's going to get the result? You will. Just because it wasn't your fault. Which is how we all think now. We want to try and blame someone else, but how absurd blame is. I kind of hear you, but it's interesting. But are you sort of hearing what I'm saying too?
I kind of am, but
Yeah.
I'm still focused on the different kinds of things that you would regret. You
So,
go
for
and-
example, give an example.
you go and kill someone, kill an animal,
Uh-huh,
versus you saying, you know, you're ugly or something like that.
Right.
There's
Yeah.
different levels of regret. You've
But
done
that's
something.
another discussion now, isn't it?
And that's completely
But hang
different
on
from
a
your
minute.
two examples
But
that
that's
you
another
used.
discussion. That's another discussion, a question of degree of negativity, isn't it? So do you agree that, okay, that's another discussion. That's a question of degree, and that's not the issue here. It's a question of how we define something as a good seed and a bad seed, isn't it? So the Buddha would say, a seed you plant, everything you think, you plant seeds in your mind. That's just the nature of it. And he says some of those seeds will be good, based upon, as a result of actions you do that are useful to others based upon kindness and compassion. Now you might give $20 million to a lot of people, that's a very strong action of compassion. You might give $1 to somebody, that's a smaller action, but the principle is it's coming from the wish to benefit. So that's a virtuous seed, and the Buddha would say that will naturally grow in your mind and ripen as an equivalent kind of happiness for you. It's just the way it is. So then you might kill 1 million people, or you might kill an ant. The intention was to kill. The reason was because they're not doing what you want, or you whatever you think, whatever the reason is, which would be deluded, Buddha says. And then that will ripen as your suffering. That's the issue. Degree is something else. So it's a question whether you want to think about that your mind, every microsecond, is having thoughts, and every one of those thoughts sows a seed in your mind based upon how you have to, based upon whether it's negative, positive, and that's quite technical, and it's quite subtle to see that. We have to look into it quite deeply. And that every single one of those seeds that your thoughts and actions plant in your mind will ripen in an equivalent way in the future as your happiness or your suffering. That's the point. Can you hear the point there?
Yes.
Okay, that's the one to think about. And then the point is, given that some of my actions were dumb and were based on ignorance or delusions, and that they will ripen as my suffering, you have to ask yourself, do I want the suffering results? And you probably say no, because no one likes suffering. So then the logical conclusion would be you want to pull them out. Would it not be? Even if you were misled and deluded and you really thought that killing fish was good. You see what I'm saying?
I think so.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
What else? Someone? Nobody? So let's...
I got
Okay.
a
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
Not sure exactly how to phrase this, but if you went to a psychologist and you felt guilty about some specific thing you did, they might view that one way. And then I'm thinking it from the Buddhist point of view is the difference between guilt related to a feeling of some specific action and what a psychologist would call neurotic guilt, which I'm not clear how to define, but it's more like a feeling of guilt which you sort of go around looking to attach to events. Like, maybe that doesn't make any sense.
You mean having a sort of pervasive sense of I'm bad, I'm no good, I'm about everything. It's kind
Yes.
of a guilty personality.
Right,
Well,
right. Or is it just a matter of degree?
It is a
Like
question.
from a Buddhist
We've all
point of
got
view.
that. And Buddha would say that we all have that sense of self-blame because we cling to this neurotic self. It mightn't be so evident to us just listening to this intellectually, but that's the logic in Buddhist psychology. The more ego grasping we have, the more the clinging to the self, the more attachment to get what I want, the more aversion when we don't, and the more anger or the more guilt, depending on your personality. We all have it naturally. It's self-absorbed, neurotic, not fair, poor, and guilt is also not fair, poor me, isn't it? It's not my fault, you know? Although we have all this guilt, we blame. It's just a function. It's one of the many ways that these deluded states of mind function in our mind, which are unhealthy and which causes suffering. But some people can have that, you know, tendency. You hear about people who are racked with guilt the whole time, always beating themselves up, always thinking they're hopeless. And this sense of, it's really like it's just simply self-hate, you know? And that's a function of, it's a function of ego grasping. It's actually a function of it. It's just ego, you see, having any of ego grasping at all, which is this positing this strong sense of a self, a neurotic self, naturally gives rise to negative states. Naturally. They're partners. The more ego grasping, the more misery, the more guilt, the more arrogance, the more jealousy, the more anger, the more fears. Some people have more guilt, some people have more aggression. We're all variations of the same thing, you know. But they're all in their nature neurotic and painful. Every one of them. So whether you hate yourself or hate someone else, it's the same state of mind. Ego in its nature is self-hating. Wait for it. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah?
Well, I think it'll take some time really thinking about it and
Yeah.
pondering it for it
No, that's
to
right.
kind of
That's
sink
right.
in.
No, that's exactly right. And the virtuous states of mind are the opposite to ego. They're spacious, courageous, connected to others, and that's why they're healthy. And this is why the first one, we have to go into our minds very deeply and just look at the mind, really see it, not be scared of it. We have to see our mind, unpack it, like I'm saying here, really deeply and really clearly, to degrees that we don't understand in our materialist view of therapy. Because when you go to your therapist, you go to a person who has the view that your parents made you, who has the view that your mind is physical, who has the view that you are an innocent victim and that you must have been harmed in the past. And we try searching into the events and the past and the genes and the DNA to try and find the source of this guilt. Whereas the Buddha is much more subtle, much more kind of fundamental. He says you've got to look inside your own thoughts and unpack them and deconstruct them and argue with them and really get to hear the script of all these different crazy roommates in our head. And then slowly, with the virtuous roommates, argue with the crazy roommates and literally change those thoughts, because they're all thoughts. They're all only thoughts, but very subtly, deeply held thoughts. And so necessarily it's introspective, and necessarily you're the only one who can do it. So it really does demand an immense amount of introspection that we don't have when we even do our therapy in our culture. That's why we need decent concentration technique. That's why we just need to listen to Buddha's very clear model of the mind and get very clear what is in its nature a negative state, what is a positive, how are they different, what's the characteristics, how do they function. It's quite subtle. It takes quite time. Do you see what I'm saying? So slowly, you know.
Yeah. It takes time.
It does. But be happy with your progress. You know? So why don't we now do the last two steps of these four? This third one, I'm not going to go into that too detailed. That's where you, in this case, do any practice. You can do any practice you know. You could go through these steps and you could just, you could do Om Mani Padme Hum there. You could visualize sending love to people. Or you could do, classically, this visualization and recitation of the mantra of Bodhisattva. But I'm not going to go into detail here. Any technique there is the antidote. You do in your daily life, whatever you want to do. But the classic one is this practice, is this visualization and recitation of the mantra of Bodhisattva. The fourth step is, as Pabonka Rinpoche says, the most important. This is where you make the changes. And you won't do this one unless you've done the first one. The regret is opening the door. I did do it, and I'm sick of the suffering. I've got to change. Then you will have compassion and take refuge in the Buddha, and who's your doctor. Then you'll take the medicine, and then you will take stock again, and you will make some decisions to make some changes. And if we don't do this, nothing will change. And this is based again on the concept, the logic of karma, that every thought you have sows a seed in your mind. So if you're regretting having killed, let's say, because you don't want those seeds to ripen as your future suffering of being killed and so on and so forth, and you do the practice and blah blah blah, then the fourth step will be you better make a decision about changing here. You better make a decision. So you just don't, that's why if you get someone to forgive you, or you're a good person, Robina, it's okay. You won't make a decision to stop killing. So guess what? The habit is so strong, so you'll keep killing. So you've got to make some changes. This is where it's painful. You've got to be responsible. So maybe you've never thought of not killing before. So you might go, okay, I'll give it a go. I won't kill for 24 hours. You'll make a decision, like a commitment to yourself. I will not kill for 24 hours. And then guess what will happen? Most likely, You'll remember your commitment and you'll leave those ants alone. You won't kill for 24 hours. So you're just growing a new habit. And then eventually you keep listening to the Buddha's teachings, let's say, and then you finally decide you're going to become a Buddhist and you take the vow, I will never kill, which means you commit yourself for the rest of your life to never intentionally kill a living being. This is how the mind makes changes. This is just like any habit. We all know about this. You know. I mean, it's so interesting. Like in March, I decided I went on a special diet in March. Shall I tell you the diet?
No.
It's called eating less. So I would go by calories, right? So the tipping point for me is a very small number of calories because I know that. So easier, 2 months I lost 25 pounds. And I sort of managed to keep it off. But what I'm saying is, since I gave up Kung Fu about 25 years ago and I kind of got fat again, I thought, I'd always say to myself, oh God, I will lose weight. Well, believe me, I never did. Until March when I said, I will lose weight. It's so simple. The intention. I will. That's when you do something. Believe me, I won't even walk out that door until the thought arises, I will walk out the door. This is so obvious, but we just take it for granted. This is the meaning of karma. This is the meaning of intention. As Lama Zopa says, everything exists on the tip of the wish, the thought, the intention. I will. Then, with courage, you will do it. So when I said to myself, I'm sick of this, and I chucked out my chocolate ice cream, and 3 months, maybe 3 months, and I lost my 25 pounds, Because I said, I will. That's all I'm using the example. So you've got to say, I will, but you don't lie to yourself, as Lama Zopa says. You don't say, I will never get depressed again if it's your oldest habit. That would be silly. You don't say, I will never kill again if you haven't made the decision to never kill. You've got to be really reasonable with yourself. You've got to know your own mind, know your capabilities. And then you tell yourself, you give yourself a commitment. And then you know that decision to do it. As soon as I saw the chocolate ice cream, my hand stayed in my lap because I remembered my decision. It's so skillful. It's so reasonable. But it takes time, and of course we fail, and you pick yourself up again, and you just keep making these new decisions. But of course, if we have guilt, I'm hopeless, I'm no good, I'm bad, I'm useless, you can never make a decision to change because you don't think you should change anyway. And anyway, you think you can't change. I'm hopeless, aren't I? So regret is the first step. It's so crucial. Then you can have the courage to make changes. One step at a time. And then delight in your progress. Because basically our mind is the boss. But the trouble is because of the meaning of karma, we come fully programmed with all these habits. Since conception, we are fully programmed, what it says, with all the tendencies that we will then express in our life. So the habits are very deep, very, very deep. And because we have ego grasping and we have this self-hate, we will run to the old habits. It's like we'll run to the knife, stab me in the heart with it again. This is the irony and the tragedy of ego. It is self-hate. And the habits are very deep inside us. So we're going to be very clear with ourselves, very kind, but also very kind of ruthless at the same time. And it's only for our benefit. Of course the compassion comes in there, but you've got to realise it's for your benefit. Then we slowly become the boss of our own lives. Okay, so one extra component here, which we need to think about, which again sounds like we need this, but it's really powerful. This is Buddha's deal, is that the power of vows. Psychologically, it's very fascinating. I remember Lama Zopa saying one time, but you can have a person who's doing bucket loads of practice day and night, but doesn't have a vow, let's say the pratimoksha vow, the very basic level of vow, like a vow not to kill, doesn't have that vow. And then he said you can have another person who's merely keeping their vows nicely, but not doing much else practice. He says the second person creates infinite more virtuous karma and purifies their mind infinitely more powerfully. So don't hear this as superstition again. Let's try and analyse it, When we understand the meaning of the word karma, which is the word intention. Okay, so the Buddha says, even just to get another decent human life, we need bucket loads of really strong, virtuous karmic imprints, seeds planted from intentional non-killing, intentional non-stealing, intentional non-lying. You've got to intentionally, consciously decide. Every time you do that, you sow that seed in your mind. And even just at the time of death, to have enough virtue there, merit, virtuous karmic seeds, to be able to get another decent life, you need masses of this. Now, the way Lama Zopa says it is that virtue isn't just that, isn't so powerful. It's very weak. Our virtue is not so strong. We don't have anybody cheater. We have no emptiness. And not only that, but here we are all sitting in this room right now, probably not killing, right? But if we're not thinking, oh, I must not kill that ant at this moment, then you are not creating any karma of non-killing. Can you hear the point I'm saying? I need you to say yes or no. If you don't,
yes, yes,
tell me
yes.
and I will explain it. What about you? What's your name? Sweetie Pie?
Dan.
Behind Sharon.
Dan,
Dan, thank you. You understand what I'm saying, Dan?
repeat it again, please.
There you go. See, I told you. It's too many thoughts, you know. It's too, and I say too quickly. These are, what I'm trying to do here is, it's like talking about computer science. It's technical. It's technical here, okay? So it takes time. Okay. The word intention means karma. Every intention we have sows a seed and leaves an imprint, leaves an impression in our mind. So just to get another decent human rebirth, once we've died, the Buddha would say, we need access to lots and lots and lots of positive, intentional, karmic seeds left by the intention not to kill, not to lie, not to steal. That's the minimum level of morality practice, of refraining from killing, refraining from lying, refraining from stealing. Are you with me, people? Are you with me, Dan?
Yeah.
That's the practice of morality. Now, we are sitting in this room right now, not harming anybody, right? But if there's no intention to not harm, you don't create any karma of not harming. You with me? Can you hear what I'm saying now?
Yes.
There's no seed planted, and you need a lot of seeds. So, only when you see the mouse and you go, oops, I better not kill it, then you leave a seed in your mind. Now, if you have a vow not to kill, the Buddha would say, you've committed yourself for lifelong, I will never intentionally kill. And you reiterate that every night with this practice, and you keep digging that groove deeper and deeper and deeper in your mind that way, then every second, Buddha says, that you have that vow and keep it nicely. You could be snoring asleep. You could be hanging out with your girlfriend. You could be drinking your beer. You could be doing anything else. But every second, 24 hours a day, you've got that vow. It's so potent, the Buddha would say, that you are creating that virtue and even also purifying your mind because of the power of vows. Buddha goes on about this hugely. They even say that people who hold vows of morality, a commitment to live your life in such a way that you will consciously not harm others, it's so powerful that you have this subtle kind of energy that's visible to clairvoyance. They say there's like this subtle form that clairvoyance can see. Now, one has to think about this, I accept, but this is said to be the power of living in vows. So in other words, the more, even they say, let's say you're a person who identifies with being a fisherman. I'm not criticizing fishermen, I'm just using an example of a certain profession that we all know about that is involved in killing sentient beings, which the Buddha would suggest is a negative thing to do. I don't know, we've all got these imprints. But a person who totally identifies with being a fisherman, thinks about being a fisherman. What was that example I used, that little boy, who from the time he was 3 ran like a magnet to fishing. Even he called himself Salmon. He was in love with fishing. He defined his entire being in terms of being a fisherman. Well, that's like keeping a vow to kill. It's the opposite vow. Because his whole persona was defined in terms of being a killer of fish. I'm not trying to be horrible now. So the more powerful an action is, mentally, the more powerful the imprint in the mind. So a vow is said to be like a rocket boost to our wish to be moral. It makes it easy to practice virtue. It purifies also your mind at a very deep level. So one needs to think about this. Are we communicating, Dan?
Yes.
Thank you very much. So then at this 4th step, if you have taken vows, pratimoksha, bodhisattva, tantric, you must every night reiterate those vows. You must. It's like you're doing push-ups. You keep doing push-ups every day, you keep getting stronger at it. Well, if you just leave your vows there, they'll get weak. You have to remember them, and you have to regret having broken, and you have to vow, I will never break again. I will never kill again. You dig that groove in your mind, and then it becomes like, it's like if you don't practice piano. Oh, I'm a pianist, you'll say. I played piano 25 years ago. Don't be ridiculous. If you don't play every day, you're not a pianist. So if you don't remember your commitments and remember what you're trying to do, because here you're programming your mind, not your fingers to play piano, then it will get weak. And as Amazon says, we're insane not to do this practice every day. So there you go. Finished. 42. Any questions? Oh, no, maybe we could talk about now. Any questions about that? And we can discuss why we purify our mind finally when we realize emptiness. Shall I say that? Talk about that then for 15, 10 minutes, 5 minutes?
Yes.
Why realizing emptiness is the final purification. Well, a series of assumptions we need to get clear here. First is that in the mental consciousness we have, as I said, these are technical terms, positive states which are to some extent in sync with reality. That is to say, they're at least linked to some extent to interdependence, which is reality. So therefore they're valid states of mind. Then you've got the neutral ones, they're fine. Then you have the non-virtuous, the negative, the neurotic ones, the lie. They are neurotic, they're fear-based, and they are liars. They are not in sync with reality. They're based upon the ego grasping. They're based upon the fantasy of self-existence, which is why they cause suffering. First point. Second point. All these, finally, in the mind, which we think of as emotions, as feelings, mainly based upon this body. But once we start to do single point of concentration, once we start to understand the model of the mind according to the Buddha, we're going to see that the stuff in the mental consciousness comes down, all of it, to being concepts, conceptual stories, detailed descriptions, assessments of something. They're thoughts, basically. They're thoughts. All of them are thoughts. So the Buddha is saying these negative states, starting with the most instinctive, most primordial misconception, known as ignorance, maripa, that clings primordially to the sense of self, it too even is a thought. But it's so deeply ingrained, so primordial, so ancient, that forget thinking it's a thought. It's like deeply instinctive. So we basically become programmed with that, and then the attachment on the basis of it, and the anger on the basis of this, and the pride and the jealousy and all the others. We become fully programmed with these deep instinctive habits from countless life Buddhisms. So talk about subtle psychology, talk about unconscious, talk about subconscious. I mean, unbelievable. They're deeply instinctively ingrained to the point of complete, just utter belief that they're true. We don't even hear them as thoughts. As Lama Zopa says, we don't even know our mind plays a role at all. So ingrained these misconceptions are. So we have to unpack all this. So, if, this is just hearing this now, if the negative states of mind all come down to being wrong thoughts about reality, which is what we're saying. They're thoughts. Remember the word thoughts, even though they're instinctive, deeply held. They're all wrong thoughts. And if, as Buddha's saying, which is crucial, they're adventitious, which is to say they're not integral to our being, which means we can rid the mind of them, which is the point of all Buddhist practice. If that's true, then when, through single point of concentration, through much listening to the Buddhist teachings about emptiness and all the rest of the stuff, we can then finally identify the deepest root delusion called ignorance that believes in the self-existent me and you and everything else, which is this elaborate, deepest ingrained thought. If we finally, through our meditation, can unpack that thought and learn to hear how it's a lie and get to see as a result the absence of the fantasy it clings to, that's the realization of emptiness. And from the first moment of our non-conceptual insight into that absence of the fantasy that misconception grasps at, that's the first moment of the direct perception of emptiness. And from that second forward, you can't go back. And that's the beginning of nirvana. So it's a psychological procedure. So when you've seen the absence for the first time of that fantasy, that's what realizing emptiness, quote unquote, means. And that's when you've uprooted the delusion, the root delusion, then finally you purify negative karma. Until that point, the seeds of the karmic imprints are still there because it's still the clinging to the I. So until we've given up the clinging to the I, you'll never stop suffering. It's only when you've given up that thought in the depths of meditation that you now cut karma. That's the real purification. And Vajrasattva is a manifestation of emptiness. I think it's about that. So does that make sense, people? Food for thought? It was only 5 minutes. So way to go. Slowly, slowly, chip away, chip away. So they talk about how every time we stop anger and jealousy, depression and attachment and low self-esteem, they're like the branches of the root, you know? They're branches of a neurotic eye. But eventually you've got to cut that one out. That's when you cut the root, you cut karma. You haven't finished the job yet, you've got more to go, but you can't go back. But until then, Buddha says we've had countless lives of incredible virtue, we've had countless realizations, we've had countless powers, cities, we've had clairvoyance, countless lives. But we haven't realized emptiness. That's the job we have to do. That's when we cut the root. Because it's the grasping at the self that creates the cause for us to do all the negative actions we do. Because they're clinging to the self and getting what the self wants. When you no longer believe in that self, negative, anger and attachment have nothing to hold on to. Then there's only the growth of, the removing of the subtler imprints, first to liberation, then to omniscience, and then the realization of Buddhahood. So it's a practical thing. It's a doable thing. Yes, it's all accessible to us. It's not a mystical thing. It's not a belief thing. It's hard work. A friend of mine, a Nyingma practitioner in New York, she went off to do a year's retreat in France, and she came back and said, Robina, I had to go back. I just began seeing my mind. And she did another year. I just began seeing my mind. She did another year. I just began to see my mind. So, there's so-called unconscious and subconscious. It goes way, way deeper than we imagine. But, once we're on the map, we're okay. Once we've got a map, we can relax. If you haven't got a map, then you're in trouble. If you've got a map, and you check the map, and it's a valid map, you just go one step at a time. One step at a time. One step at a time, and delight in your progress. Okay, let's finish. Food for thought. So we think for these 2 hours, as many moments as there have been, there's as many seeds each one of us has planted. Each one of us listening, thinking, analysing, including me. Thank you for the opportunity. So may we nourish these seeds with our marvellous practice from this moment, our effort, our virtue, our purification, so that this potential of ours for Buddhahood can ripen as quickly as possible, for the sake of me and countless suffering sentient beings. And may bodhicitta, compassion, grow and grow in the hearts of all. Kewa, on this page, next page, 89 or something, 90, on the bottom of the page. $89, I think, or 90 or something. 91, I think. Kewa And may we never develop, even for a moment, wrong views toward the deeds of our most precious gurus. With faith and respect gained from seeing their goodness, may their full inspiration flow into our hearts. Hearts, as you say in Massachusetts, as we say in Australia. Hearts. Not hearts. Okay, thank you everybody. Bye.
Thank you, Robina.